Good evening from New York. I'm Chris Hayes. The biggest story from last night's primary elections is that a full-out insurrectionist coup plotter is now a stone's throw away from winning one of the most important swing states in the country, Pennsylvania. His name is Doug Mastriano, and he has essentially pledged that if the opportunity arises once again to actually successfully pull off a coup, he will be the first in line to do it. Right now, he's won the Republican gubernatorial primary pretty handily with about 44% of the vote, more than 20 points ahead of his closest competitor in a very crowded field. And so when an avowed ally of Trump's plot to overturn the 2020 election wins that kind of margin in a Republican primary, we should all take notice. Because let's keep in mind, again, Trump almost got away with it. The only reason that the coup did not work is that there were enough people in key positions of power that wouldn't go along with it. There were just a handful of instances where things could have turned out very differently. If Georgia's Republican Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger, for example, had done what Trump asked and somehow found the votes he needed to flip the election. Or if Georgia's Governor Brian Kemp called a special legislative session to send an alternate slate of Trump electors. Or if the Wayne County Board of Elections, whose members Trump had called personally, had not certified the results of the election. Or if the Republican chairman of the Maricopa County Board of Supervisors in Arizona did not defend Biden's victory in his state. If any of those circumstances broke differently, say because a coup sympathizer was in the key position of power, we would have been almost certainly in a full-blown constitutional crisis, or worse, the end of American democracy as we know it. A person who loses the election retaining power against the will of the people. And I just want to be really clear here, because we're in cable news, sometimes you hear hyperbole, just to what we're talking about. It's not just that Doug Mastriano is a, radical, conservative, whatever, is a coup sympathizer. He was actively involved in plotting the coup in 2020. Intimately, one of the most prominent figures in it. Not only did he spend thousands of his own campaign funds to organize bus trips to D.C. for the insurrection, he also went himself. You can see him there marching to the Capitol on January 6th. He says he didn't go in the building, but came pretty close. He says he spoke with Trump at least 15 times between the election and the insurrection about plans to overturn the results of the election. Mastriano introduced legislation to undo the certification of the 2020 election in Pennsylvania, which he called compromised and corrupt.
Governor Wolf didn't look into any allegations and blew them off. Secretary of State Boockvar blew off all the allegations of shenanigans. Our Attorney General, declared a winner before one vote was counted. And so the whole process has been corrupted. Nobody cares to see if there was shenanigans, cheating, fraud, disenfranchisement. And so we're going to rise up and say, look, constitutionally, we have the final say on who the electors are.
Okay, to be clear here, that's all nonsense. The election was not compromised. There were no shenanigans in Pennsylvania. But Mastriano is saying we, meaning us in the state legislature, are going to throw out the votes of Pennsylvanians. We get to say, we the rulers, we the politicians tell the people who will rule them, and they can suck it up and take it. And in doing so, Mastriano was saying what Trump wanted to hear. In fact, Trump even promoted that clip you just saw on his official YouTube channel. But the legislation to decertify the election failed. And so Mastriano moved on to a new plan, auditing the election. He visited that bogus election audit in Arizona. He said it was something he wanted to emulate in his state of Pennsylvania.
If we're able to do an audit in Pennsylvania, that's the model I have. I think we just need to put everything to rest here by having one last look. We'll see what comes out of Arizona. Maybe as my governor and as my attorney general say, it was a perfect election. I mean, I doubt it. But with so many people raising questions, I don't know how you can press on without addressing that.
Of course, they did come out with their ridiculous audit, which said the election was free and fair and that Joe Biden won the state. Now, Mastriano was even subpoenaed by the January 6th committee for his role in helping Trump plan the coup. Subpoena reads, quote, "We would like to better understand events that you witnessed or in which you participated and the communications we believe you may have had with national, state, and local officials about the outcome of the November 2020 election." So this state representative, state senator, Doug Mastriano, who tried to decertify the election, who traveled to Arizona to tour that bogus election audit, who says he spoke to Trump more than a dozen times about the coup, who the January 6th committee says has information relevant to its investigation, and who didn't just go to the Ellipse rally, but then marched to the Capitol during the insurrection. He is now one of the two candidates in what is essentially a toss-up race to be governor of the state of Pennsylvania. He'll be facing off against the Attorney General, Josh Shapiro. And mark my words, Mastriano can win. Pennsylvania is a swing state. November is shaping up to be very tough sledding for Democrats. This guy could be in charge of the next election. And if a Democratic candidate for president wins Pennsylvania in 2024, well, what do you think is going to happen? Like, no one is hiding the ball here, right? Certainly seems likely that Governor Doug Mastriano would work to undermine that victory. And get this, it gets even worse because Pennsylvania is one of the states that allows the governor to appoint the Secretary of State, which means the person overseeing the election will be handpicked by the guy who tried to steal the last one, who says that the Democrats stole the 2020 election. In fact, Mastriano has already said whomever he picks for the job will be ordered to erase the state's voter rolls, requiring every Pennsylvanian who wants to vote in 2024 to re-register with the state. Again, no one's being subtle about this, certainly not Mastriano and his allies. I want to play one exchange between Mastriano and a supporter from his victory party last night. A little hard to hear because of the music, but listen carefully to the end.
What do you want to tell us tonight you're about to experience victory?
We're going to send a message from the United States of America that things are changing in Pennsylvania, but Pennsylvania changed. It's going to be fantastic.
20 electoral votes as well.
20 electoral votes as well. Now, Pennsylvania will only have 19 electoral votes in 2024, but you get the point. I mean, charitably, well, win Pennsylvania, but also less charitably, but more plausibly, the way they see it, he controls the governor's mansion, controls Pennsylvania's electoral votes. They're already claiming victory. Again, by all appearances, they seem to be saying that with Mastriano in the governor's mansion, Republicans are guaranteed to win the state. Because again, go back to what his record was in 2020, right? He thinks they have it in their power to not allow any other outcome. So the stakes are really high for this race in November. But also, I want to take a moment here to say, setting all this aside, that Doug Mastriano is still unfit to be governor. He is a hard-right extremist. He's got ties to the so-called Christian nationalist movement. He appeared at a fringe conspiracy conference with ties to QAnon, where, quote, organizers played a video claiming the world's experiencing a great awakening that will expose ritual child sacrifice and a global satanic blood cult. An investigation found his personal Facebook page was, surprise, full of bigoted Islamophobic posts and memes. In 2018, he shared an article titled, quote, "A Dangerous Trend, Muslims Running for Office." In his victory speech last night, Mastriano even vowed to pass a so-called bathroom bill, which would ban trans individuals from using the bathroom that corresponds with their gender identity. So again, even if we weren't plotting a coup, this is a guy with very extreme views. I would hazard to say too extreme for a purple state. But he's basically a coin flip away from becoming the next governor of Pennsylvania.